At 0730 hours on June 6, 1944, Staff Sergeant Philip Stretchick crouched behind a Sherman tank on Easy Red sector of Omaha Beach, watching German machine gun fire tear through the morning air 3 feet above his head. Around him lay the wreckage of the first assault wave. Bodies floated in the surf. Burning vehicles smoked on the sand. The 16 gap assault teams of the Special Engineer Task Force had been scheduled to clear 50-yard wide lanes through the beach obstacles within 20 minutes of landing. It had been 40 minutes. Only 5 gaps existed where there should have been 16. Stretchick was 32 years old, a combat engineer with the 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, the big red one. He had trained for 18 months for this moment, learning to use Bangalore torpedoes to breach wire obstacles, to place demolition charges under enemy fire, to clear paths for armor and infantry. The training had covered every scenario except the one he now faced. The engineers who landed with the Bangalore torpedoes were dead or pinned down. The equipment was scattered across 500 yards of beach, and the concertina wire stretching along the seawall remained intact, stopping every attempt to push inland. The Bangalore torpedo sections lay in the sand 30 yards from Stretchick's position. 5-foot steel tubes, 2 inches in diameter, weighing 13 pounds each, 9 pounds of explosives per section. Connect them together with spring clip sleeves, push them under the wire. Detonate. Clear a path 5 feet wide through any obstacle. Simple in theory, fatal in practice when machine guns covered every foot of open beach. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Stretchick looked at the wire. Then he looked at Lieutenant John Spaulding, his platoon leader. Spaulding was 26, a West Point graduate who had landed with 32 men. 19 remained. They were isolated between 2 German strongpoints, WN-62 and WN-64, protected by a fold in the terrain that offered temporary cover. But cover meant nothing if they could not advance. The wire stopped them. Without Bangalore torpedoes to blow gaps, they would die on this beach. The device that could save them had been invented 32 years earlier, 6,000 miles away, by a British Army captain who had never fired a shot in combat. Captain R.L. McClintock of the Royal Engineers served with the Madras sappers and miners at Bangalore, India, in 1912. He was a superintendent of instruction, a teacher of military engineering, assigned to solve a problem that had plagued colonial forces for a decade. The Boer War and Russo-Japanese War had littered the Indian subcontinent with unexploded ordnance, booby traps, and abandoned defensive positions. Sappers clearing these obstacles suffered casualties daily because they had to approach mines and barricades directly to destroy them. McClintock needed a device that could detonate obstacles from a safe distance, something portable that infantry could carry, something simple that soldiers could assemble under combat conditions. He began experimenting with metal tubes filled with explosives. The tubes could be connected end to end, pushed forward from cover, then detonated remotely. The sapper would remain 3 meters back, protected from the blast. The first prototypes were built in the workshops of the Madras Engineer Group near Ulsor Lake in Bangalore. McClintock worked with Indian sappers who understood metallurgy, explosives, and field engineering. They tested different tube diameters, different explosive charges, different connection methods. The tubes had to be strong enough to withstand rough handling, but light enough for one man to carry several sections. The connections had to be secure, but quick to assemble. The nose had to slide smoothly over obstacles without snagging. It took 26 hours to build the first 3 working Bangalore torpedoes. The cost of materials and labor totaled 9 rupees, 5 annas, and 10 paise. Each torpedo consisted of a 5-foot tube, an explosive charge, a connecting sleeve, and a pointed nose cone. Multiple sections could be screwed together to create longer assemblies stretching up to 50 feet. A sapper could extend the torpedo from a trench, snake it under barbed wire or booby traps, attach a detonator, and trigger the explosion from cover. McClintock documented his invention in the March 1913 issue of the Royal Engineers Journal. The article described the device's purpose, construction, and tactical applications. By 1914, the British Army had formally evaluated and adopted the Bangalore torpedo as standard equipment for obstacle breaching. It spread to other armies immediately. The French produced their own version. The Italians manufactured tubes from local steel. The design was too simple and too effective to remain proprietary. When the First World War began in August 1914, the Bangalore torpedo was already in service with British and Indian forces, but nobody had anticipated the kind of warfare that would develop on the Western Front. Trench systems stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss border. Between opposing trenches lay no man's land, open ground, swept by machine gun fire and protected by multiple belts of barbed wire. Attacking infantry could not advance until engineers cleared paths through the wire. But engineers working with wire cutters were exposed and vulnerable. German machine guns killed them before they could cut enough wire to matter. The Bangalore torpedo changed that calculation. Royal Engineers could assemble torpedoes in their trenches, push them forward under the wire, and detonate them without leaving cover. The explosion cleared a 5-foot-wide gap through even the densest wire entanglements. Infantry could follow immediately behind, advancing through the breach before German defenders could respond. During the Battle of the Somme in July 1916, British forces used Bangalore torpedoes extensively in their opening attacks. Engineer teams preceded infantry waves, blasting gaps in German wire minutes before the assault began. The coordination was not perfect. Many torpedoes failed to clear sufficient wire. Many engineers were killed before completing their work. But the concept proved sound. When Bangalore torpedoes worked as designed, they enabled advances that would have been impossible with wire cutters alone. At the Battle of Cambrai in November 1917, British Royal Engineers used Bangalore torpedoes as diversions. They would detonate torpedoes at multiple points along the German line, creating the sound and appearance of simultaneous attacks. German forces would rush to defend the breaches, while the real British assault came from a different direction. The tactic demonstrated the torpedo's psychological impact. The distinctive explosion of a Bangalore meant an attack was imminent. Defenders had to respond. By 1918, every combatant army on the Western Front employed some version of the Bangalore torpedo. The French developed longer sections. The Germans created variations using captured British tubes. The Americans, who entered the war in 1917, trained their engineers with British-supplied Bangalores. The device had become standard military technology, as common as grenades or flamethrowers. After the war ended in November 1918, military planners studied lessons learned from 4 years of industrial combat. They examined tactics, equipment, casualties, effectiveness. The Bangalore torpedo appeared in every post-war engineering manual. It had proven reliable, portable, and essential for breaching obstacles under fire. The design required no significant modifications. Captain McClintock's original concept remained sound. Through the 1920s and 1930s, the Bangalore torpedo remained in British and American arsenals, though few officers expected it would ever again see combat on the scale of the Great War. Military thinking had moved beyond trench warfare. Theorists like B.H. Liddell Hart and J.F.C. Fuller argued that future wars would be wars of movement, tanks and aircraft exploiting breakthroughs, rapid advances, replacing static fronts. There would be no need for devices designed to blast through wire in no man's land, because there would be no more no man's land. That assumption lasted until May 1940, when German forces invaded France and demonstrated that modern warfare still required obstacles, fortifications, and defensive positions. The Germans built the Atlantic Wall along the coasts of occupied Europe, concrete bunkers, artillery positions, machine gun nests, and miles of barbed wire, concertina wire, steel hedgehogs, wooden stakes, all designed to stop amphibious assaults before they reached the beach. In 1941, the United States Army began studying British obstacle-clearing methods in preparation for eventual entry into the war. American engineers examined the Bangalore torpedo and recognized its value. The War Department ordered development of an American version. By 1942, the M1A1 Bangalore Torpedo had been standardized for production. The M1A1 followed McClintock's original design with minor modifications. Each section measured 5 feet long and 2.125 inches in diameter. The tube weighed 13 pounds when loaded with 9 pounds of explosive, an 80-20 amatol mixture with TNT boosters at each end. Sections connected via spring clip-equipped sleeves that allowed quick assembly under combat conditions. A blunt nose sleeve prevented snagging. A standard Corps of Engineers blasting cap fit into recesses at either end of each section. Bangalore torpedoes were packed in wooden crates containing 10 sections, 10 connecting sleeves and 1 nose sleeve. Total weight per crate was 176 pounds. Combat engineers could carry individual sections in backpacks or haul crates on vehicles. The system was modular, portable, and scalable to any obstacle. American factories produced over 3.25 million Bangalore torpedo sections during World War II. They were shipped to every theater where American forces fought: North Africa, Italy, France, the Pacific Islands. Anywhere engineers needed to clear wire, destroy bunkers, or breach fortifications. But producing millions of torpedoes did not guarantee they would work when needed. The device was simple in concept. Execution under enemy fire was anything but simple. Engineers had to crawl forward, carrying awkward steel tubes while machine guns swept the ground. They had to assemble multiple sections with shaking hands while mortars exploded nearby. They had to push the assembled torpedo through obstacles that might snag or deflect it. They had to attach detonators and pull firing pins while under direct observation by enemy riflemen who wanted them dead. Training for these tasks occupied months at bases in England and the United States. Engineers practiced assembling Bangalores in darkness, in water, while wearing gas masks under simulated fire. They learned to judge distances, to estimate how many sections would reach a target, to place charges for maximum effect. They crawled through barbed wire with torpedoes in tow, pushed them through concertina, detonated them in training fields that resembled actual battlefields. The Special Engineer Task Force preparing for the Normandy invasion trained specifically for obstacle clearance on fortified beaches. The task force consisted of the 146th and 299th Engineer Combat Battalions, organized into 16 GAP assault teams and 8 GAP support teams. Each GAP assault team included 41 Army engineers and a 13-man Navy combat demolition unit. They were equipped with Bangalore torpedoes, Hagenson packs, demolition charges, wire cutters, and tank dozers. Their mission was brutally straightforward. Land at H plus 3 minutes on Omaha Beach, cleared 50-yard wide gaps through all obstacles from the waterline to the seawall, 6 gaps on easy red sector, 2 on easy green, 2 on dog red, 2 on dog white, 2 on dog green, 2 on fox green. Complete the work before the rising tide covered the obstacles. Mark the gaps so follow-on waves could land safely. Then widen the gaps until the entire beach was clear. The planning was meticulous. Every team knew its assigned sector. Every engineer knew his role. The demolition loads were calculated precisely. The timing was choreographed to the minute. Tank dozers would push obstacles at the lower beach. Engineers would blow obstacles with Bangalores and Hagenson packs. Navy teams would mark cleared lanes with colored buoys. The first wave of infantry and armor would land at H hour. The GAP assault teams would land at H plus 3. Cleared lanes would be ready by H plus 20. That was the plan. The plan assumed the German defenses would be suppressed by naval bombardment and aerial attack. It assumed the DD tanks would reach the beach to provide covering fire. It assumed landing craft would deliver teams to their assigned sectors. It assumed the engineers would have 20 minutes of dry beach before the tide covered the obstacles. All of those assumptions proved wrong. On the morning of June 6, 1944, the aerial bombardment missed its targets. Poor visibility caused bomber crews to delay their drops, and most bombs fell inland behind the German positions. The beach defenses remained intact. The naval bombardment lasted only 40 minutes from 05:45 until 06:25. Many German bunkers survived undamaged. The DD tanks of the 741st Tank Battalion were launched 6,000 yards offshore. The sea was rough. Waves swamped 27 of 32 tanks before they reached land. 5 tanks made it to the beach. The 743rd Tank Battalion, launching closer to shore, got most of its tanks onto Dog White, Dog Red, and Easy Green sectors. But tank support on Easy Red and Fox Green was nearly non-existent. Landing craft missed their targets throughout the morning. Strong currents pushed boats eastward. Smoke from burning vehicles obscured landmarks. Coxswains struggled to identify beach sectors. Of the 16 Gap assault teams, only 5 landed anywhere near their assigned positions. 3 teams came ashore where no infantry or armor covered them. Others landed hundreds of yards from where they were supposed to work. The German defenders opened fire immediately. Artillery, mortars, machine guns, small arms. The fire was heavy and accurate. Casualties were numerous. Infantry advancing through the obstacles died by the dozens. Demolition teams trying to clear lanes lost men and equipment. Landing craft hit underwater obstacles and exploded. The carefully planned assault dissolved into chaos within minutes. Working under this devastating fire, the engineers set about their task. They dragged Bangalore torpedo sections from landing craft that were taking direct hits. They assembled tubes while bullets kicked up sand around them. They pushed torpedoes under wire while mortars bracketed their positions. Some teams lost their equipment in the surf. Others lost men before they could begin work. Several engineers were killed when enemy fire detonated the explosives they were carrying. One engineer from the 146th Engineer Combat Battalion dragged his rubber boat loaded with Bangalore sections off an LCM just as German artillery struck. The premature explosion of his supplies killed 7 of 8 men. Only 1 survived. Another team had finished laying its explosives under a section of obstacles when mortar fire hit their position. The premature detonation of their charges killed or wounded 19 engineers and several nearby infantry. The men who survived kept working. Despite the casualties, despite the chaos, despite the plan falling apart, the engineers succeeded in clearing gaps. They blew a gap at Dog White, another at Easy Green, 4 more at Easy Red on the 16th Infantry Regiment's front. 6 gaps total, not the 16 that were planned, not cleared all the way to the beach in every case, but 6 paths through the obstacles where there had been none. The engineers suffered over 40% casualties, more than 400 men killed or wounded out of roughly 1,000 who landed in the first waves. They had performed their mission under the worst conditions imaginable, clearing enough lanes to allow follow-on forces to reach the beach. Without those gaps, Omaha Beach would have failed. The infantry would have been trapped at the waterline, unable to advance, unable to survive. Concentrated fire. The tanks and artillery could not have landed. The entire assault would have stalled. But the gaps alone did not win Omaha Beach. The wire beyond the seawall remained intact. The concertina barriers stretching along the beach flat still stopped infantry from reaching the bluffs. The planned exits through the draws were covered by German strongpoints. Soldiers, huddled behind the seawall, had nowhere to go. They were pinned down, taking casualties from mortars and artillery, unable to move forward or back. That is where Staff Sergeant Philip Strechik found himself at 0730 hours, behind a Sherman tank on Easy Red sector, looking at the wire, looking at the Bangalore sections in the sand, looking at Lieutenant Spaulding, who was looking back at him. Someone had to go get those torpedoes. Someone had to assemble them under fire. Someone had to blow the wire so 32 men could attempt to scale the bluffs and attack the German positions from behind. The alternative was to wait on the beach until German mortars killed them all. Strechik did not wait. He crawled forward through the sand, staying low, moving during the gaps in enemy fire. He reached the first Bangalore section, grabbed it, dragged it back to cover. He went out again, grabbed another section, came back, went out a third time, German riflemen spotted him. Bullets snapped past his head. He kept crawling. He reached the third section, grabbed it, and dragged it back to where Spaulding waited. 3 sections, 15 feet of steel tube, enough to reach the wire if they could assemble them and push them forward without getting killed. Spaulding helped connect the sections. Spring clips snapped into place. The nose cone went on the lead section. The blasting cap went into the tail. Detonating cord ran back to their position. They had built a functional Bangalore torpedo under direct enemy observation, in the open, on a beach where hundreds of Americans were dying. Now they had to use it. Stretchick and Spaulding crawled forward with the assembled Bangalore torpedo. 15 feet of steel tube, 27 pounds of explosives. They pushed it ahead of them through the sand, staying as low as possible. German riflemen kept firing. Bullets snapped overhead. Mortars landed 50 yards to the left, then 30 yards. The wire was 10 feet ahead. Stretchick reached it first. He pushed the nose cone under the lowest strand of concertina, threading the torpedo through tangled metal. The steel caught on something. He pushed harder. The tube slid forward another 3 feet. He pushed again. The torpedo was halfway through the wire obstacle now, with 8 feet of tube still exposed behind them. Spaulding attached the blasting cap to the tail section. He unreeled the detonating cord and crawled back 10 yards. Stretchick followed. They lay flat in the sand, face down, hands over their ears. Spaulding pulled the firing pin. The explosion tore through the wire with a flat crack that was lost in the general noise of battle. Smoke and dust erupted. Metal fragments spun through the air. When the smoke cleared, a gap existed where seconds before there had been solid wire, 5 feet wide, enough for 1 man at a time, enough for 32 men to advance through if they moved fast. Spaulding went first. He ran through the gap, weapon ready, expecting German fire. None came. The explosion had not been noticed amid the chaos of the beach, or the Germans covering this section were already dead from naval bombardment. Stretchick followed. Then, the rest of the section. 32 men who had landed that morning. 30 still alive. They were through the wire. Ahead of them rose the bluffs, steep slopes covered with light vegetation, mined according to intelligence reports. The planned exit draws were covered by German strongpoints. Spaulding and Stretchick looked at the terrain and made a decision that would change the course of Omaha Beach. They would not attack up the prepared exit. They would climb the bluff through a narrow ravine between strong points WN-62 and WN-64. The climb took 30 minutes. They moved slowly, watching for mines, following trails that showed signs of previous use. Sergeant Fred Biscoe warned everyone to avoid dead grass, which usually indicated mine placement. They navigated 2 minefields by sticking to well-worn paths. Private First Class Richard Gallagher led the way with a Browning automatic rifle. Stretchick and Spaulding followed close behind. At the top of the bluff, they found themselves behind German positions, trenches, machine gun nests, bunkers, all oriented to fire down at the beach. The Germans had not prepared defenses against attack from inland. Spaulding organized his section into a defensive semicircle. Then they attacked. They moved through the trench system methodically. Stretchick spotted a machine gun team. He shot the gunner. The other 2 Germans surrendered. The Americans tried to interrogate them, but the prisoners would not talk. The section kept moving, clearing trenches, bunkers, and fighting positions. By mid-morning, they had neutralized the eastern approaches to Strongpoint WN-64. Captain Joe Dawson arrived with another unit from G Company. They coordinated their next moves. Dawson would swing left. Spaulding would attack WN-64 from the right. Together, they cleared the Strongpoint by early afternoon. The German positions that had dominated Easy Red Sector were now in American hands. Troops pinned down on the beach could finally advance inland. Of the 32 men who landed in Spaulding's section that morning, 2 were killed on D-Day. Sergeants Louis Ramundo and Fred Biscoe. 8 more were wounded. 7 men would receive the Distinguished Service Cross. Spaulding, Stretchick, Private George Bowen, Private First Class Richard Gallagher, Sergeant Kenneth Peterson, Staff Sergeant Curtis Colwell, and Sergeant Clarence Colson. General Dwight Eisenhower personally pinned the Distinguished Service Cross on Philip Strechik on July 2, 1944. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery awarded him the British Military Medal a week later. Strechik's company commander, Captain Ed Wozensky, later wrote that if Strechik did not earn a Congressional Medal of Honor, no one did. The Bangalore torpedo that cleared the wire at Easy Red was not unique. Across Omaha Beach that morning, engineers used Bangalores wherever they could assemble them under fire. Staff Sergeant Sewell Kroll deployed a torpedo to clear wire for another section. Engineers from the 146th and 299th Combat Engineer Battalions blasted gaps in obstacles throughout the morning despite catastrophic casualties. But Bangalore's importance extended far beyond D-Day. Throughout the European theatre, combat engineers used the device in every operation requiring obstacle breaching. In the hedgerows of Normandy, Bangalore's cleared wire along roads and between fields. During the fight for Aachen, in September 1944, engineers used torpedoes to breach German fortifications in urban terrain. In the Hürtgen forest, they cleared wire obstacles, protecting pillboxes and bunker systems. The device also saw extensive use in the Pacific Theater, where American forces faced Japanese defensive positions that were among the most heavily fortified of the war. At Tarawa in November 1943, Marines encountered coconut log bunkers and concertina wire protecting Japanese positions across the tiny atoll. Bangalore torpedoes helped breach these obstacles, though casualties among engineers remained horrific. The battle cost over 3,000 American casualties in 76 hours of fighting for an island 2 miles long. At Saipan in June and July 1944, Marines faced 30,000 Japanese defenders who had fortified themselves in underground caves and bunkers. The Japanese defensive system included multiple belts of wire and minefields. Combat engineers used Bangalores to create breachways through these obstacles. The battle lasted 24 days and cost over 16,000 American casualties. Iwo Jima, in February 1945, presented perhaps the most challenging obstacle-clearing operation of the Pacific War. 22,000 Japanese defenders had spent months preparing defenses across the tiny volcanic island. They fortified every cave, every ridge, every approach with wire, mines, and interlocking fields of fire. Marine combat engineers landed with the assault waves, carrying Bangalore torpedoes among their equipment. The fighting lasted 34 days. Nearly 7,000 Americans were killed. 20,000 were wounded. Engineers clearing obstacles suffered proportionally higher casualties than infantrymen because they worked in the most exposed positions under the heaviest fire. Throughout these operations, combat engineers occasionally improvised when standard Bangalores were unavailable or insufficient. Field expedient versions were constructed from materials at hand: metal fence posts, captured enemy steel, sections of pipe, any tube strong enough to contain explosives and push forward through obstacles. The most common field expedient version used metal picket posts filled with plastic explosive. Engineers would select straight posts approximately 4 to 6 feet long. They would stuff composition C2 or C4 plastic explosive into the hollow interior. A blasting cap and time fuse provided detonation. Multiple posts could be lashed together with wire or rope to extend their reach. The improvised torpedoes worked on the same principle as the manufactured version: push them under obstacles, detonate them, clear a path. These field expedient devices never received official documentation. No engineering drawings exist. No formal specifications were recorded. They were solutions developed by combat engineers working under fire with whatever materials they could find. The knowledge spread through informal networks, engineer to engineer, unit to unit, the same way Curtis Cullen's hedgerow cutters had spread through armored units in Normandy. The Bangalore torpedo's effectiveness came from its simplicity. It required no specialized training beyond basic demolitions knowledge. Any engineer could assemble and deploy one. The device worked consistently. It cleared obstacles that would otherwise require engineers to work in the open under enemy fire, and it was scalable. One section cleared 5 feet of wire, 10 sections cleared 50 feet. Engineers could adapt the length to whatever obstacle they faced. If you find this story engaging, Please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. But the human cost of using Bangalore's remained high throughout the war. Engineers had to approach obstacles while exposed to enemy fire. They had to assemble tubes while under observation. They had to push torpedoes forward, often crawling within arm's reach of wire and mines. German and Japanese defenders understood that engineers clearing obstacles represented immediate threats. They concentrated fire on anyone attempting breaching operations. The casualty rates among combat engineers reflected this reality. On D-Day, the Special Engineer Task Force suffered over 40% casualties. Engineers clearing obstacles at Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima died at rates that exceeded infantry losses. These men volunteered or were assigned to work that was statistically more dangerous than assault infantry missions. They did it because without cleared paths, the assaults would fail. Without breaches through wire and minefields, infantry and armor could not advance. After the war ended in August 1945, military analysts studied the effectiveness of various obstacle-clearing devices. The Bangalore Torpedo received high marks for reliability and simplicity. Post-war engineering manuals continued to include instructions for its assembly and deployment. The device remained in service with American and Allied forces for decades. During the Korean War, from 1950 to 53, combat engineers used Bangalore's to breach wire obstacles, protecting Chinese and North Korean positions. The same basic M1A1 design that had been developed for World War II remained effective against Cold War-era defensive obstacles. Vietnam saw continued use of the Bangalore, though engineers also employed newer demolition technologies. The device proved useful for clearing wire and bamboo obstacles in jungle terrain. Engineers modified deployment techniques for the specific conditions of counterinsurgency warfare, but the underlying principle remained unchanged. Modern militaries still train with Bangalore torpedoes or similar devices. The current version used by United States forces is the M1A2, which differs only slightly from the World War II M1A1. The tube diameter, explosive charge, and connection method are nearly identical to Captain McClintock's original 1912 design. Over a century after its invention, the Bangalore torpedo remains a standard tool for combat engineers. The men who used these devices in World War II paid prices that extended far beyond the war itself. Philip Strechik survived D-Day but fought in 4 more major campaigns. He was wounded multiple times. By November 1944, when his unit entered the Hurgan forest, Strechik had logged 440 days of frontline combat. The forest fighting broke him. He shook uncontrollably and babbled incoherently until evacuated with combat fatigue. He was sent back to the United States and discharged from the army. Strechik married his sweetheart Sophie, and they had 4 children. He worked as a builder in Florida. But he could not leave the war behind. His physical wounds caused chronic pain. His emotional wounds were worse. He suffered nightmares constantly. Battle dreams tormented him every night until he stopped sleeping. On June 25, 1957, Philip Strechik took his own life. He was 38 years old, another casualty of D-Day. 13 years after the fact, Lieutenant John Spaulding fought for 3 more months after D-Day before being wounded near Aachen in September. He spent 2 months recovering, then returned to combat. In February 1945, during the 1st Infantry Division's push to cross the Roa River, Spaulding was medically evacuated with combat fatigue. The war had destroyed his confidence. He became irritable, nervous, depressed. He developed an intense hatred of firearms. After his discharge, Spaulding returned to Kentucky. He entered politics and was elected to the Kentucky House of Representatives, but the war never left him. He became a functional alcoholic, self-medicating in an era when there was little formal help for post-traumatic stress. On January 27, 1959, John Spaulding was found dead in his Owensboro home. He had been shot while sleeping. The circumstances remain unclear. He was 41 years old. Of the 32 men who landed with Spaulding's section on June 6, 1944, most survived the war physically, but many carried wounds that never healed. Bruce Buck remembered that Strechik always sent him back for ammunition during the Battle of Aachen. He remembered Spaulding as a good officer who cared about his men. He remembered D-Day as something no one had a right to survive. The Bangalore Torpedo that helped these men breach the wire at Omaha Beach was a simple device: 5-foot sections of steel tube, 9 pounds of explosives per section, spring clip connections, a pointed nose cone, total weight 13 pounds. It had been invented by a British captain who never saw combat, refined through 2 world wars, produced by the millions, deployed by engineers who died using it. The device saved countless lives by allowing obstacle breaching without prolonged exposure to enemy fire. But it could not save the engineers who had to crawl forward to deploy it. It could not protect the men who assembled it under German machine guns. It could not shield the soldiers who pushed it through wire while mortars exploded around them. Captain R.L. McClintock, who invented the Bangalore torpedo in India in 1912, retired from the British Army and disappeared from historical records. His invention outlived him by decades and continues to serve militaries worldwide. But McClintock never witnessed what his device meant to combat engineers crawling through wire under fire. He never saw men like Philip Strechik and John Spaulding risk everything to clear paths for others to follow. The memorial to World War II combat engineers exists not in monuments or museums, but in the fact that assaults succeeded, beaches were taken, wire was breached, minefields were cleared, infantry and armor advanced because engineers went first, carrying tubes of explosives, crawling toward obstacles, working under fire that killed them at rates higher than any other specialty. On June 6, 2024, the 80th anniversary of D-Day, ceremonies were held at Normandy to honor the veterans. Few of the men who landed on Omaha Beach remain alive. Philip Strechik's son, Ron, received several awards on his father's behalf during a ceremony in New Jersey: the New Jersey Distinguished Service Medal, formal induction as a distinguished member of the 16th Infantry Regiment, a proclamation recognizing Philip's service, a joint legislative resolution honoring his legacy. The medals recognize valor, they acknowledge sacrifice, but they cannot capture what it meant to crawl through sand with a Bangalore torpedo while machine guns swept the beach. They cannot describe assembling explosive tubes with shaking hands while mortars bracketed your position. They cannot explain pushing steel through wire while knowing German riflemen watched you from 50 yards away. The story of the Bangalore torpedo is not the story of one engineer breaching 9 minefields in one night. That would be the myth, the simplified version that makes good headlines. The truth is more complex and more meaningful. It is the story of thousands of combat engineers across 2 world wars and multiple theaters who used a simple device to solve impossible problems. It is the story of men who crawled toward obstacles because their comrades needed paths cleared. It is the story of casualties measured in percentages that exceeded infantry losses. It is the story of improvisation, adaptation, and courage under circumstances that defied survival. The Bangalore torpedo remains in service today because the problem it solves has not changed in over a century. Armies still place wire obstacles and minefields to channel attacks and create kill zones. Engineers still need to breach these obstacles to allow maneuver. The device that Captain McClintock invented in 1912 still accomplishes this mission more effectively than many modern alternatives, but the human cost remains constant. Engineers clearing obstacles work in the most exposed positions under the heaviest fire. They volunteer or are assigned to tasks with casualty rates that approach or exceed 50%. In intense combat, they do this work not for medals or recognition, but because someone must go first. Someone must clear the path. Someone must breach the wire so others can advance. On easy red sector of Omaha Beach at 0730 hours on June 6, 1944, that someone was Philip Streczek, a 32-year-old technical sergeant from New Jersey who spoke Polish, German, and English, who had fought in North Africa and Sicily, who had earned 3 Silver Stars before D-Day, who crawled forward to retrieve Bangalore torpedo sections while German riflemen shot at him, who assembled the device under fire, who pushed it through wire and detonated it, and led 30 men through the gap and up the bluffs and behind German positions, and changed the course of the battle. Streczek died 13 years later, alone in Florida, another victim of wounds that no doctor could treat. But on June 6, 1944, he did what combat engineers have done throughout history. He went first. He cleared the path. He made the impossible possible. That is how wars are actually won, not through brilliant strategy or overwhelming firepower alone, but through sergeants and privates solving immediate problems with available tools, through mechanics welding German scrap metal to tanks, through engineers pushing explosive tubes under wire, through soldiers who do what must be done even when regulations say it cannot be done and casualties say it should not be attempted. The Bangalore torpedo is a simple device, but in the hands of combat engineers willing to use it under fire, it became one of the most effective obstacle-breaching tools ever invented. And the men who deployed it, from McClintock sappers in India to Streczek's section at Omaha Beach to Marine engineers at Iwo Jima, earned a place in military history that no monument can adequately honor. They were the ones who went first. They were the ones who cleared the paths. They were the ones who made every amphibious landing, every assault, every advance possible. They deserve to be remembered not as statistics or footnotes, but as the combat engineers who used simple tools to solve impossible problems and paid prices that lasted the rest of their lives. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.